Have you ever stopped to think about how the entire Shrek story would collapse like a house of cards if Fiona had never been cursed? The movie's major plot twist, the very thing that adds depth to her character and makes her so much more than a generic princess, is precisely that detail. That duality between appearance and essence, between expectation and reality. If Fiona had grown up like any other royal princess, following the traditional guide on how to be a good wife for a prince, what would be left of her story? And, even worse, what would be left of Shrek? The answer isn't very encouraging. Without the curse, Fiona would have never been locked away in the tower and would have grown up within the walls of the far, far away castle, surrounded by royal luxury and the rigid standards that shape princesses from birth. From childhood, she would have been trained to master the art of smiling when necessary, maintaining perfect posture even when she wanted to relax, and speaking only what was deemed appropriate for someone of her status. In other words, Fiona would have become exactly what was expected of her, without ever needing to question anything. Unlike the Fiona we know, who grew up in isolation and had time to dream about true love and grand fairy tale adventures, this Fiona would have never faced life outside the castle. She would have been raised to become a prince's wife, nothing more, nothing less. Her parents would have never felt ashamed of her, never had a secret to hide, never worried about the day she would have to reveal something no one would accept. To them, Fiona would have been the perfect example of an ideal daughter, beautiful, graceful, well-mannered, and, of course, ready for an arranged marriage. And who better to fill that role than Prince Charming? From the very beginning, the fairy godmother had been orchestrating the perfect plan to unite her son with the future queen of Far, Far Away. In the original movie, the biggest obstacle to that strategy was Fiona's curse, the nighttime transformation that made it impossible to sustain a marriage without the truth coming out. But in this alternate version, with no imperfection to hide, Fiona would accept the marriage without resistance. She might even believe it was her destiny, that this was the happy ending meant for her. But would she truly be happy with Charming? That's the real question. Even in the original story, Fiona always showed a desire for something more authentic. Although she grew up with the idea of a prince rescuing her, she wasn't naive enough to fall in love with just anyone. Charming, let's be honest, was not exactly lovable. Superficial, spoiled, and narcissistic to the extreme, he didn't want her, he wanted a trophy to show off. Fiona, who always demonstrated a strong personality and a sharp sense of justice, would hardly feel fulfilled next to someone like him. The problem is that, having never known another reality, Fiona would probably accept this fate. She would live in an unhappy marriage, without true love, upheld by appearances. And if she ever realized that wasn't what she wanted, it would be too late. She wouldn't have anywhere to run. There would be no altar outside the palace, no Shrek to show her that love could be something different from what the history books dictated. Meanwhile, far away in a quiet, muddy swamp, Shrek would continue his life without ever realizing something was missing. In the original movie, Fiona was the first person to see Shrek as something beyond a scary ogre. She was the first to treat him as to laugh at his jokes, to relate to his insecurities. Through her, Shrek discovered that he, too, was worthy of love. But without the curse that brought them together, that meeting would never have happened. Shrek would go on believing that solitude was his only fate. He always pretended not to care about being alone, but it was obvious that this was a defense mechanism. Deep down, he had simply accepted the idea that no one would ever accept him. And in this alternate version, he would be right. Fiona would never have a reason to leave the castle and meet someone like him. She would never have a reason to look beyond the surface, to try to understand beneath the rough exterior of an ogre. To her, Shrek would be just one of those creatures from fairy tales, a monster, a repulsive being, something to be avoided at all costs. And Shrek, in turn, would have been a princess like Fiona. In the original movie, he fell in love with her not just because she was kind to him, because she was like him. She shared his habits, his rough ways, his stubbornness, his impatience with third rules of the human world. But this alternate Fiona wouldn't have any. She would have been shaped to be perfect, flawless, exactly the kind of person Shrek despised. If, miracle of fate, the two happened to cross paths, what would happen? Nothing. At most, Fiona would keep her distance, and Shrek would continue his life without a second thought. Without a genuine connection, without the bond that made them special to each other, they would just be two strangers living in completely different worlds. Meanwhile, back at the castle, the fairy godmother's control over Far Away would be absolute. Without Shrek to challenge traditions and open King Harold's eyes, he would eventually give in to the pressure and hand over the kingdom to Charming. The monarchy would become a game of appearances, where decisions were made based on what was appropriate, not what was right. Fiona would be nothing more than an ornamental queen, smiling at the subjects while, inside, she felt increasingly trapped in a life without purpose. And Shrek? Well, he would remain in his swamp, believing that was the only place he could exist. He would never discover to be loved. He would never know that, in another version of the story, was someone who understood him and accepted him exactly as he was. And so, the great moral of Shrek would vanish completely. What made this story so special was precisely the idea that destiny is not set in stone, that appearances can be deceiving, rules can, and should, be broken. Fiona would never have discovered her true self, never felt the freedom imperfect, never experienced the genuine love that was born from her and Shrek seeing beyond the masks the world had placed on. The great irony of this alternate story is that, in the end, Fiona's curse was never really a punishment, it was a gift. It was what led her from a life where she could never be herself. It was what led her to someone who didn't want her to change to be accepted. It was what allowed both her and Shrek to discover that love doesn't have to be real. If Fiona had never been cursed, she might have never realized that a true happily ever after is one that follows a perfect script, but the one that leads us to be who we truly are. And if you enjoyed this journey into an alternate universe where everything could have gone wrong, be sure to leave a like to support this content and help it reach more people. If you're curious to explore other crazy possibilities in the world of animation, there's an incredible video waiting for you on the screen. Click there and join me for another insane theory.